I'm going to try to keep everybody awake talking about insurance after lunch. Hopefully that goes well. I always draw the straw of talking after lunch, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not when it's about insurance. But I am excited to talk to you all today to let you know that there are resources out there to help you out when you're trying to help patients, whenever you're receiving denials from insurance company, to just kind of explain what the Office of Consumer Health Insurance does. So the main role of the Illinois Department of Insurance is to provide education and to protect consumers. And the way they do that is all the companies that are licensed by the Illinois Department of Insurance, we make sure that they're following state and federal laws. So complaints about brokers, complaints about agents, complaints about your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your health insurance, life insurance, all of those things. Anything insurance related that we license the company, we have regulatory authority over them and are able to assist. So with that being said, what we're going to go over today is how you would file a complaint against a health insurance company, how you would file an internal appeal with the insurance company, and what you do if that's denied, and the next step in the process would be an external review. So we're going to cover all those things step by step so that you know what we do and what the process is. So in 2000, for the Managed Care Act, they established the Office of Consumer Health Insurance, which we all in that department call OCHI. So if you ever hear the term OCHI, that's the Office of Consumer Health Insurance. Basically what we do there is we provide education, we educate patients about their rights. If they contact us regarding a denial they received, we let them know kind of what their next step is, who they can contact, and so forth. So we basically handle questions and problems to help help the consumers work through them. The staff that are there, there's about 6 of us in that staff. We're responsible for following state laws. We kind of have to keep up to date on the new state laws, new federal laws, being familiar with different insurance policies, and in the case for all of you, Charlie's Law has been one that we've had to keep up to date on. So we're all educated on that. So you're getting valuable information, and if you call and we're not able to give it to you right at that time, we're going to tell you that we need to look it up, do a little bit of research, and we'll call you back. So what we end up being, though, is kind of the initial point of contact for everyone. We're the first person that our information is given if you're uninsured and you need help getting insurance. We'll forward you to Medicaid. We'll forward, there are some plans out there, the Hill-Burton plan. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but there are agencies that will provide services at a lower or reduced cost for consumers. So we'll refer patients there. If they have questions on where they can get coverage if they don't have insurance. We also will let them know what their rights are if they do have insurance regarding getting a referral, seeing someone out of network, and then providing guidance on internal appeals, complaints, and external reviews. Now, this always gets kind of confusing, so I'm going to try to not confuse anybody with this, but if you have questions, feel free to write them down, and we'll talk about that at the panel at the end that Wendy was speaking about. The department regulates fully insured plans. So fully insured plans are plans where the insurance company is actually paying the claims. So those are the plans that we regulate. We don't regulate Medicaid, for instance. The Healthcare and Family Services, HFS, does the regulation for that. And then what always causes a lot of confusion for everyone is self-insured plans through group employers. Large employers, a lot of the times, are a self-insured plan, and that just means that the employer is actually assuming the risk for those claims. They're paying those claims, and the insurance company is just acting as an administrator. So they're handling the claims processing piece, but they're accepting no risk. So Illinois mandates don't apply to those plans because they can kind of pick and choose their benefits for their employees. So that always causes a little bit of confusion because the Department of Labor actually regulates those because they regulate the employer. But what we will do is still try to get you the information on what your next step is, you know, where you can go, who you can talk to provide guidance on if you have any options available to appeal a denial. And I know that's a mouthful of information, and I did list in this slide all of the ones that we do not regulate. The self-insured church plans, sometimes you'll see school plans that we also don't regulate, and those are not regulated by the Department of Labor, but those are regulated by federal CMS because they're non-governmental federal plans. So that's another big one that we see, and then Medicare and Medicare Advantage. Let's see here. So basically what you would do as a physician or if you've got a patient that has received a denial of services for medication, for a referral to another doctor, they're seeing someone out of network and unable to get an approval to see someone out of network, the first thing you need to do is contact the insurance company. Let them know, what the situation is with the patient. Bring to their attention why they need to see this doctor, why this needs to be covered. You want to go through all of that with them. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that that you let them know that you're referring them because you're unable to treat them, if that's what you're doing. If you're referring them to another physician outside of the network, that you're unable to treat them or they need to see someone else. You can then contact OCHI and let us know, what has gone on there. We'll talk to you about the type of plan that you have and go over with you what your next steps should be. We do ask that the most important thing that you can do is make sure that you keep track of all of the information, all the conversations that you have with the insurance company, who you spoke to, what date you spoke to them, what they told you, because the ability is there to pull those phone records. If something is said and you did something based on that conversation, it's always helpful for us to be able to say we want to pull the phone records from this date and listen to them. So always be sure to do that. The one thing that we can't do, we're not able to provide any kind of legal advice. We don't ourselves review for medical necessity. In those cases, what we do is that goes out for an external review and a physician is assigned to review those. So we don't, within our department, actually do medical necessity reviews there, but we are able to, if it qualifies, get it to the people that will do a medical necessity review. In cases where it's your word against theirs, we're not able to make determinations on that, but that's why it's important to make sure you keep all of your documentation and know when your phone calls were, if you were given some incorrect information and you took action based on that. The understanding is, though, as the insured, they have to know what their policy says. So it's always a good idea, to tell the patient or the parent, in this case, to review their policy, see what their policy says, what their requirements are, what they were supposed to do, and to know what kind of policy they have. Because there is always that is going to come up, that it's their responsibility to know that this is their policy. The way that you can file a complaint with our office, you can do it online, you can do it by mail, you can fax it, you can email it to us, but we do have to have it in writing. We're not able to do complaints verbally. A lot of times we'll get verbal questions, more of an inquiry from people, and we can answer those. But as far as sending something over to the insurance company to find out what occurred, For those, we actually have to file a complaint and get it in writing. And the main reason for that is because that's how we track trends of what's going on with insurance companies and the responses from insurance companies. So it allows us to report that information and to actually be able to track it to say, hey, this is a trend we're seeing here, what's going on. So that's the reason for that. And I know that a lot of times when you get into expedited situations, you know, you don't want to fill it out in writing, but that's the importance of it. It does allow us to be able to track it and gives us the documentation. If you file it online, we do have an online message center that's a portal. If you're a physician, you can fill that out. If you're a nurse working for a doctor, you can actually create an account, and for every patient you have to deal with, you would just enter in a new patient each time. So you don't have to completely fill everything out for the physician every time, you just put the patient information in every time. So it does make it a lot easier, and we correspond with you through email. It'll send you a notification through email whenever we've done anything, anytime anything comes back on that case. So it's kind of handy. A lot of people like to do that, but we do still have people that, you know, prefer to use the mail. They don't want to use email and or faxing. So there's always that option as well. Once we get the complaint, what happens is it's assigned to an analyst. The analyst then sends the complaint, everything that is provided to us, we send everything to the insurance company, and then we send you a letter notifying you that we've received your complaint. And the company then has 21 days to respond to us. Their responsibility is to look through everything that you provided and then respond back to us of how they're in compliance with Illinois laws and the terms of the policy. So typically you're looking at about a month when you get a response. They do have 21 days, but we work them as they come back in. Whenever it comes back in from the company and we get the response, we compare what was sent by you versus what come back from the insurance company, and then we compare everything and make sure they addressed everything that was in the complaint. If they didn't, we write back to them and ask them to address what's missing. If they overturn it based on that they were out of compliance, we respond and we let you know that. If they're within compliance and it's a provision of the policy, we respond to you with that information as well to let you know this is valid, they're not violating any laws or any terms of their policy. But either way, you're going to get a response from us and then a copy of the response from the company. Sometimes we'll get denials where the patient has received a denial, but they have not yet done an internal appeal, and they'll respond to us with, this is where the patient is at with this. They need to file an internal appeal, or we're requesting medical records, or we were requesting proof that they've taken this medication. And we respond back to say, this is the information that they're needing. You know, provide that information. If it's denied, please reach back out to our office. So sometimes we do get those back, but either way, we respond to let you know what the holdup is on your claim. As far as providers go, we do work with providers as well. Our jurisdiction is a little bit more limited with providers on what we can do. For instance, we can't do a lot regarding coding issues, but as far as, you know, claim denials, the amount of the settlement, a lot of times we can get involved in those. We try to help as much as we can within our authority. So that's, you know, we do the best we can there, but just be aware, a lot of times we can't do anything there. We do handle prompt pay complaints, so when the insurance company is delaying and they're violating prompt pay laws, we do get involved with that. And the only main thing would be contract issues and coding issues that we're unable to have anything, any kind of authority over, because it's a legal contract, and unfortunately an attorney has to help in those situations. So if you do get a denial, one of the first things that you want to do is file the internal appeal with the insurance company, and that can be filed by a parent, that can be filed by the provider or a guardian. As long as they're authorized to act on the patient's behalf, they can file the internal appeal with the insurance company. When they file the internal appeal with the insurance company, you're going to get the information back from them on why they're denying it or if they're approving it. A lot of times, consumers want to skip that process because it's urgent. I would recommend always doing the internal appeal if you can, if you have the ability. The more eyes that you get to look at it, the more statements you get back about what is missing and what they need in order to approve it. And if you bypass that process, you don't have that in front of you to let you know, hey, they don't have a copy of this lab test, or they don't have a copy of the appointment that we had with this other doctor 6 months ago. So you always want to get that information in writing so that you can make sure when you get to an external review, you kind of have all your ducks in a row and you've got all the medical records that you need to hopefully get it overturned. So, but now if it is expedited, you can request that they do an internal appeal and an external review at the same time. I would just caution against it just in case you don't have everything, and especially with the PANS patients. I know that the few that I have seen, there's a lot of medical records because they've seen a lot of physicians to get to that point, and different labs in different places, and just making sure that all of that is there. On an expedited case, they have 3 days to respond on an external review, and so they're kind of rushing through the review, but it's also a very quick amount of time to try to get medical records. And once you got that decision back, you can't send anything else in. So if you discover, oh, hey, you didn't have that, we can't ask them to reopen it. So that's one of the most important things, is just making sure that they have everything in front of them if they do request to do that. From the time they get the denial, though, from the insurance company, they have 180 days to file their internal appeal. So that's 180 days from their actual denial letter that they get. A lot of them will refer to it as an adverse determination or a final adverse determination. The date starts, the 180 days starts from that date. So they actually have to file an appeal with the insurance company in order to get internal appeal rights and also to get external review rights, because you have to exhaust the internal appeal in order to file an external review. So if you miss the 180 days, you can't file an external review either, because it has to be exhausted. So it kind of, missing that deadline causes you to miss the second deadline, your last ditch effort. So it's always important to make sure, first recommendation, for them to file an internal appeal. Whenever the carrier does respond back, they should be saying in writing what they need within 24 hours to do an appeal, and then, telling you this is what we need. Once they get it, they have 24 hours to review it if it's an urgent case. If it's still denied after that, they should actually respond. So total, you've got 48 hours is what you would be looking at from the point of a denial to the point of getting your internal appeal done in urgent cases. 24 for them to tell you what they need, 24 for them to review it when you send it, total of 48 hours. In non-urgent cases, you're looking at 3 days for them to tell you what all they need in order for you to do it, and then 15 days for them to review what you sent in and give you the response to whether it's approved or denied. In their denial that they send to you, a clinical peer should review it. I know a lot of times you will see where it's not been reviewed by a clinical peer, they will come back and say, this isn't a provision of the policy, it's not covered. If it's something that a clinical peer needs to review to make a decision, you absolutely can push back to say, I would like a clinical peer to review this. In cases that any type of medical judgment should be used to make the determination, they should be forwarding that on to a clinical peer or a medical director to look at everything to make that decision. Sometimes it gets hung up in this process of, we looked at it, this medication isn't covered, this isn't on your policy. Well, in those cases, a clinical peer needs to look at it to verify, okay, yes, they've taken all these other medications. This is what we want. So the easiest way to think of it is if you think a doctor needs to review it, a doctor probably needs to review it, and you can ask them to do that. In their response that they deny, they should actually state the reason for the determination why they're denying it. They should include the medical and clinical guidelines that they use to review it. A lot of times those are very vague. You can actually request back to them. You want to see the guidelines that they're using. You want whatever their medical policy information is regarding that denial. And then in their adverse determination or their denial letter, you should have the information on how to file an external review. They're required by law to provide you that, irregardless of whether it's a self-insured plan or a fully insured plan. It's always going to have the Illinois Department of Insurance information on it. Now, what they will typically do is if the physician has requested the internal appeal, they will send a letter to the physician, but then they carbon copy the member. So what happens is the member a lot of times thinks the physician is taking care of it. So they're not doing anything on their end, and the physician thinks the patient is doing it, and in the meantime nobody is really is doing anything there. So it's important as if you're a physician doing it, to make sure the patient knows, okay, the next step is yours, because they have to still file their member appeal if you filed an appeal for them. Unless you exhausted the member appeal for them on their behalf, which a lot of times physicians don't, because the carrier does not provide the appointment of authorized representative form in order for that to occur. So it's always important, to remember that the member has an appeal and the provider has an appeal, but the member's is the one that has to be exhausted prior to the external review. So they will usually include in there all the forms as well on how to file an external review. The external review, you can do it for medical necessity denials. You can do it if it's denied as being experimental investigational, if they have rescinded the policy, or if they're saying it's a pre-existing condition, which we don't see a lot anymore because we have the law that they can no longer have pre-existing conditions. But patients that have short-term plans, they can still have pre-existing. So, but those are the four main reasons that we'll do those for. They're going to come in the same way as complaints, by mail or online, by fax or email, the same way. Same thing with keep all of your originals. Don't send any original, keep your originals. I know a lot of doctors that actually charge for them now, so by all means keep those, send us the copies. If you need to mail them in a box, we get those too. We get a lot of mental health cases where we get a lot of boxes of medical records. So that's why the online portal helps a lot, especially in those cases. They're able, because it is a secure portal through the department, and we're the only unit that sees those. So you can always send it that way as well. The carrier, once it comes in, the carrier actually has to provide everything as well. Everything that the carrier already has, you don't need to send, but if you're concerned that it won't be provided, then I always encourage you, go ahead and send them. Then they've been provided, they'll be reviewed, and you can be comfortable in the fact that everything there is going to get looked at. Once we get the request for that, we actually send it on to the insurance company to verify the eligibility. What the insurance company checks for is to make sure the internal appeal has been exhausted. They look at the type of plan that it is to make sure it's a plan that we regulate, that it's a fully insured plan, and the reason for denial falls under one of those four reasons for doing an external review. The time frame for an external review is 4 months from that final adverse determination letter of the internal appeal. So you do your you've got 180 days from the first denial, you do your internal appeal and it gets denied again. The 4 months for the external review starts then with that final denial. So you get a pretty good length of time when you're trying to do all this, to get your information together. It's just a matter of, when it's so lengthy, saving all of that information, all of that correspondence, because it does end up, accumulating very quickly to a lot of information. So we get that, we send everything to the insurance company. They either come back and they say it is eligible for an external review, or they come back and they say it is not eligible, and here is why. If we don't agree with their reason for it not being eligible, we will push back and reference in the law why it is eligible, why it does need a medical necessity review, which we have had to do. So we will do that piece if it's eligible. If it's not, it may fall under more of a complaint, meaning it's a benefit denial and they didn't use medical judgment. So either way, we're usually able to argue it either as a complaint or as an external review if we regulate the plan. If they do tell us that it's eligible, we then assign everything that you've sent to us, everything that the carrier provides. Trying to think of everything that we send. Everything you send, everything the carrier sends, all of the information that's been provided to the insurance company for the internal appeal, all of that information then is assigned out to an independent review organization. We currently have 19 independent review organizations that we use. They're all over. We have some in California, we have some in Maryland. I think we only have a couple here in Illinois, but they are all over. So, and it's truly independent. It's chosen randomly within the system. So the next one in the list is who gets the case, and it's an unbiased opinion. If they are contracted with the insurance company, then they are listed as a conflict and it does not get assigned to them. If it's a physician that is aware of the case or affiliated with the hospital through the insurance company, that's also considered a conflict and they're not able to review it. So it is truly unbiased and not chosen by us. What we do then, once we assign it to them, they'll accept it and do a review on it. They assign it to a medical physician who is familiar with whatever it is that's being denied. I know for Panda Pans, that's always kind of been a concern because there are some physicians that, don't agree with it, and we try to make sure whenever they assign it that we let them know this is what the Illinois law is. Please reference this law when you look at it, and making sure we don't run into that. I know that that's been a concern, so that is something that we've done there, and I know that we are working on compiling a list of the actual IROs that have any Panda Pans experts under their purview. So that's one of the things that we are working on. So if we're sending it out to the independent review organization and it's an expedited case, it's about 3 days for them to respond back with whether they overturn it or uphold the decision. If it's a standard case, it's about 45 days, usually 30, usually closer to 30, because they do review everything, then they type up the report, they send it back to us. In the report, it will actually advise if they overturned it, why they overturned it, what the rationale was that they used. They are required to tell us that if they need more information. We do have some of the IROs that will reach out to us and say, I just don't have enough information here. Everything wasn't provided to me. And they'll reach out to us and we'll make sure that we get that sent to them. This is where that's why it's so important that all the records that are available be provided to that independent review organization, because they don't do a peer-to-peer review. They actually just look at paperwork. So they take a look at all the medical records that the insurance company provided, all the records that you have provided. They look at the policy and then what current medical criteria is that's out there. So if you're sending information on experiments that you want them to review, 100% send that to them. I know that Dr. Siri actually was talking about writing letters. They review those too. So they look at those letters. They look at the letters from the parent. They look at the labs. all of that information. So the better picture that you can paint for them when they're making their decision, you know, that's the biggest recommendation, because that is the only thing they have in front of them. And like I said, they will actually list in their decision what they used to review. They'll list what they reviewed. So if you have concerns, you know, did they see this information? It should be listed that as a reference, that they did look at it. I know that a couple that I have seen where there have been multiple physicians, they may have all of the recommendations from the most previous physician that has ordered the treatment, but they don't have the last 2 doctors that did all of the testing that got them to the point of where they are right now. And that information is missing, and they will state, there's no proof of this, there's no proof of this, therefore we uphold this decision. And the law doesn't allow us to say, hey, now we have this information, you didn't review it, please reopen this and do it again. Unfortunately, the way the law reads is that it's a binding decision, so we don't really have the authority to make them open it. What we have done in those cases, though, have said, we've had you reach back out to the insurance company to say, it looks like you didn't have this information, here is this information, and try to get the insurance company to review it again for medical necessity to see if it meets their guidelines. Or if there's a change in medical condition, you can always resubmit then as well. If there's a change in medical condition, you can just, you basically just start the process over with the internal appeal to an external review, because there's been a change and now you're recommending something based on the change. Let's see here. So just to kind of recap what you're going to do, if you receive any denials, you're going to, first off, you're going to contact the insurance company. Contact the insurance company. You can let them know about Charlie's Law if they're missing that. I know someone that I was talking to earlier actually was telling me that you can encourage out-of-state plans to remind them that Illinois has this law. I was not aware of that, so I'm actually glad that that information was provided to me, because what we do on our end is, if it is an out-of-state plan, we refer them to that state, because since we don't have regulatory authority over out-of-state plans. If it is a self-insured plan, sometimes we'll refer them back to their employer. The employer sometimes will actually help them, especially in cases where they've had lots of hospitalizations and it's actually going to cost more to deny this treatment because of the amount of hospitalizations. So their out-of-pocket is going to be higher, you know, if they're not following these recommendations. So that's a big thing there. We'll refer them there. If you reach out to us, we're going to either tell you that we regulate it, or if we don't, we're going to get you to where you need to go, whether it's Medicaid, the Department of Labor. Either way, we send it off to try to get as much information as we can about the plan, so that you know where you are in the process and what you need to do next, or what the patient needs to do next, so that you can help them out, help the family out, to get them where they need to go. If you file a complaint with us, like I said, you're going to get a response back from us. You're going to get a response from the company. The company's required by law to respond to us, so a lot of times we're able to get a quicker response than you may be able to, without sitting on the phone, of course. I've been there as a nurse, calling and having to get medical necessity approvals for services, and I don't miss those days. I don't miss those days at all, and that's actually how I ended up here, was learning about the Department of Insurance by looking at a denial for a patient and seeing their information on there. So, and once I learned it, I called a lot. So, so what you'll want to do, you know, is definitely utilize this as a resource. Definitely refer patients there. You know, we try to help the best that we can within where we can, whether it's helping them to get services at a reduced cost by referring them to the resources that are available, trying to get them to the correct agency that actually regulates their plans, or helping them through the process of filing an appeal, filing a complaint, filing an external review, and kind of guiding them with the information they need to provide in order to be able to do it where they know they've done everything they could.
The important thing is you know you've done everything that you could do, that they followed the law, that you know, step by step, because a lot of people aren't aware of they're not aware of our agency, that we actually regulate these companies and that we hold them accountable to be in compliance with state and federal laws. There's a lot of consumers that they don't know they have appeal rights. You know, to them, it's just a lot of writing at the end of a denial letter. So it's important that they know that we can help them, and that, you know, that's what OG's for, and that's what OG stands for, the Office of Consumer Health Insurance. So I hope you call if you need help. And I know it's a lot of information for consumers even to understand it, you know, the process. I think once you've done it though, a few times as a physician or as a nurse, you kind of just, they're comfortable with it, and we have a lot now that we consistently get information from them. They've started the habit of having them fill out the paperwork when they admit it. You know, because if they get a denial, then they just automatically submit it to us at the end. And if we don't regulate it, we at least tell them where they need to go. But they've already got the information from the patient, and they don't have to reach back out to them in order to get an authorization signed or to get forms signed. So that's an option too. If you find that you're, you know, consistently receiving denials, you can absolutely do that.
Michelle, is there a template for a form like that doctor's offices can use?
For the appointment of authorized representative form?
Well, yeah, and the information that they might need to provide to you?
There is. We are actually in the, I was actually going to bring a lot of those forms, but we are actually in the midst of redoing our website and redoing forms and fact sheets. So, but those will be, right now there is currently the provider form online and the consumer complaint form online. Those have not been updated yet, and they're not going to, the old ones will still work. We're just going to update them with the new administration, update the fonts, you know, bring them up to 2019.
But there's a provider complaint?
There's a provider complaint, and there's a consumer complaint process. So there's both. The external review, it's the member's external review, but the provider can file that for them. And it's the same thing with the internal appeal. The provider can file an internal appeal on their own, but then they can also file an appeal for the member and for themselves.
And in regards to state laws versus what the insurance company states as their policy, how does that work?
So if the policy is and the insurance company is one that we regulate, and they're required to follow state laws or state mandates, then, you know, it depends on what the state mandate is. Does it meet everything else that is within the state mandate? But if that's the case, then we push back and say, based on this mandate, this is in violation, this needs to be paid.
So where does the Department of Insurance get involved with that? Do they, before it goes to external review, is that something that would be pushed?
That would be more of a complaint, because it's actually more of a benefit denial. We do see it sometimes though on the medical necessity side, when there's new mandates. A lot of times when there's new mandates, like for instance, the new mandate with the breast MRIs, that we were seeing that a lot because it was new once it was updated. So it would come in as medical necessity, but actually what the law stated was it had to be covered if they had this condition.
So if there was, like, if someone's having problems getting IVIG covered for a diagnosis of PANS or PANDAS because a insurance company is limiting the amount, although the insurance is in the state of Illinois, and also DOI would oversee that policy. Would you say that the provider and the consumer should file a complaint saying that there's a benefit issue?
Yeah, as long as that's the reason it's denied. If they're determining it on a medical necessity front, that's when it follows kind of the external review process. If they're just saying your plan doesn't cover this, it's excluded, then that kind of falls under benefits. That gets into a very gray area, but we are monitoring those whenever we get them. We've had several of those cases where it's just very gray. It ends up being gray, but for the most part, the ones for IVIG that I've seen have been medically being denied for not medically necessary. That's the one I've seen the most. Initially, before Charlie's Law, what I was seeing was the criminal investigational, and then now it's more medical necessity.
So where is that gray area for the state law versus what your medical doctor who sees your child stating that they need IVIG and you're getting denied for medical necessity, but you have medical necessity documentation from the physician? So how is that being panned out?
So if the medical necessity piece, depending on everything that's there, the insurance company still has the ability to say, we've reviewed this through our guidelines and it's denied for medical necessity. If it's denied for medical necessity, then you follow that process, and then that's when they look at the external review organization, their provider actually looks at that medical process, looks at our law, looks at everything, and then can make the determination, based on this law, this would be covered.
But why do we have to go to an IRO or ERO for that component if there's a law that states that to begin with the consumer and provider complaints?
Because they still will have, even, for instance, like chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is probably not a good example. I mean, it is, because they still have the ability to review for medical judgment.
Okay.
Like the law doesn't take the ability for them to review it for medical judgment. What Charlie's Law specifically removed was the ability initially to not deny for experimental investigational. And then what happened was there was no diagnosis for pan-to-pans. So the newest law was wrote to accept the autoimmune encephalitis. But they still, if they review it, there's still the medical necessity determination. So they still have the ability to make a medical necessity determination, and the member still has the ability to dispute what their decision is. Just like with any of the others, because unfortunately the law doesn't say they can't review for medical necessity, so we can only regulate based on what the legislation says.
So how many doctors does it take for medical necessity letters to get involved to trump the ERO? Like, how many doctors are needed? If you have multiple medical necessity doctors from different doctors, say across the country, then where does it stop? Where the law is actually trumping the
Denial.
the denial? Thank you.
So,
Where is that?
well, the denial actually, so the denial from the insurance company, that's where they state in their policy, they're going to provide in their medical policy what their reason was for denying. So they're going to list whatever their, has to show proof of this, has to show proof of this. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to put it. Right, the medical necessity guidelines.
I think what's really, really important for all the healthcare providers, as well as any parents who might be here, or anybody who's supporting a PANS family, it's very important to teach them that they need to become extremely familiar with their
Right.
policy and understand
Yes.
exactly where they can find the definition of medical necessity in their policy.
Right.
And then when the doctor is submitting for approval, meeting all those criteria from the get-go, I think is very, very important, so that they can come back and say,
Right.
we determined this is medically unnecessary, because no, I've met A, B, and C of the definition.
Right.
You can come right back and say, nope, this is what your policy states, this is what we have met, and therefore this is medically necessary.
And that's part of the reason why it's so important to make sure when you do that internal appeal that you get from them what their response is on why they're denying it, because they're going to state in that, or they should state in that should be provided what their determination, why they made that determination, what they're missing, what they still need, because that's what you need to send in to show them, yeah, to dispute it. A lot of times, I mean, I know that that's a lot of work for patients. I really, really do. I talk to a lot of patients that, you know, well, this doctor moved or this doctor closed. I'm not sure where to get this information from. But unfortunately, that's all they have to go off of, those reviewers. So because we don't have medical staff within the department to do the reviews, we assign it out, and then they're just looking through all of this information, trying to make sure, okay, here's what the policy says. I see this. I see this. You know, they're going through that, and then they're looking at current medical guidelines to see what's out there. We got about a half overturn rate in general across the board for everything that we do external reviews on. So we do get a lot overturned, and a lot of times it's they just didn't have all the medical records. You know, that's a frequent thing. There's information that they didn't have because the member assumed, oh, well, they paid for all of this stuff before, so they already have all that. I don't need to send all that. But they don't look at it again. Or the pharmacy that it was overturned by, like for instance, I'll say it used Prime Therapeutics. So Prime Therapeutics, they had provided this medication or approvals for this medication 2 years ago. But now they need to try a new medication because they had reactions to these other medications. They assume, well, they already know I've tried them. But Prime Therapeutics didn't get that information to the insurance company. So they don't know. They don't have any of those old records. So, you know, it's important to keep track of your information. I will admit I'm not even good about like writing down everything. But it really is a good idea when you're in situations where you have to track it. And, you know, I think that those of you that are involved with this, you are in those situations where it's a good idea to have all the information. It's a good idea to keep the dates of who you talked to, when you went to the doctor, where you went, just so you can make sure you don't forget anything and you provide everything.